If you've ever felt stuck, like no matter what you're doing, you're always coming out at the end of the year pretty much the same person, or you thought you would be way further along on your goals than you currently are, then there's a good chance it comes down to the system or the habits that you've been cultivating. I recently finished reading Atomic Habits, which emphasizes the idea of building a sustainable system from the ground up. One of my favorite quotes is that we do not rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. If you're not evaluating all the small decisions and actions that you're taking every single day, there's a good chance no matter how hard you try, you're not going to end up where you want to be. I got a lot out of this book, and I even went so far as to make a single poster that kind of summed up all of the quotes and techniques that I could use as a cheat sheet every day. I've tried to distill down all of my thoughts into three main sections. There's identity, environment, and systems. Let's jump into it. Early on in the book, what really jumped out to me is this idea that you're building the who and not necessarily the what. I feel like there's a lot of books and systems and techniques out there that are constantly trying to get you to make your first million, and they're always trying to tie you to a specific outcome. Whereas I haven't really heard any other books talk about focusing on who you want to become and how, as a result of that, you kind of have this internal drive to achieve those results. So instead of saying, I want to hit 100,000 subscribers on YouTube this year, you might say that I'm going to record one video a week. And so you're now focusing on the inputs. What can I actually control? Because I could create 100 videos for the year and still not hit 100,000 subscribers. And the downside of that is that my happiness is now tied to that result. And so at the end of the year, if I don't hit that goal, then I don't really feel like a success. Whereas if I rewrite that goal as I want to have 100 videos uploaded to YouTube by the end of 2026, and I hit 87 of those videos, that's a pretty clear marker that I was 87% done on my goal. Not everything is going to be measurable like that, but the point is that you're not tying your satisfaction and identity to whether or not something out of your control is actually going to happen. This leads you to looking at some of those small wins and accomplishments as evidence for who you are becoming. One of my favorite quotes here is that every action you take is a vote for the person you want to become. It's rather than saying, I walk 7,500 steps every day, you start to view yourself as a healthy person and say things like, I walk because I am a healthy person. And I really love this bird's eye view of the big picture you're creating with all these habits because it helps you stay focused on the identity again and not just the goal. There's this idea that a lot of people get caught up in the noise and they feel busy, but they're not actually making progress. So it could sound like I read a ton of books on how to be a great photographer, but the action is actually going outside and using your camera. So while there's always a time and place for research and learning and kind of that preparation side of a habit, there's also the action and what you actually accomplished at the end of the day. Number 2 is all about designing an environment that works for you and helps support you in the moment to achieve your goals. There's a lot of good stuff in here, just practical advice that he gives, but one of the things that really stood out to me is the law of least effort. When you're trying to build a really healthy habit, you want to remove as much friction as possible. So if you want to be going to the gym at 7 a.m. in the morning, then setting out your gym clothes the night before is going to help set yourself up for success so that when that alarm does go off early and you don't want to get out of bed, everything is kind of taken care of besides you just actually getting out of bed. So the more friction and obstacles you can remove from achieving that goal in the moment will really help you so you don't have to rely solely on willpower. This can also work the opposite way in what he calls using commitment devices, where you actually add intentional friction for bad habits. This would look like, for me, removing social media from my phone so that I can really only get to it on my computer or my iPad, which I don't always have with me. Also, rather than just trying to remove a bad habit, you can replace it with something good that you're trying to build. I'm trying to get better at scrapbooking, and so rather than just doom scrolling and always being on socials, I can remove it from my phone, but also have a permanent space set up in our apartment where I can always grab scrapbooking materials and jump right in. So again, you're adding friction to the bad and you're removing friction for the good. He also talks about creating specific zones for your habits, and the idea here is loosely there's one room, one use. I work from home, and this is absolutely tough to do when you're so overlapped with your work, but I generally only work at my desk in this corner of our apartment. If I'm going to work on something personal like scrapbooking, I'm probably not going to do it in my home office. I'm going to try and do it at the kitchen table or try and set that up in a space that is out of the way from other use cases. It's obviously tough when you're in a small space to do this, but it could also look like using different devices for different uses. Like I said, having an iPad for entertainment, but then your phone becomes more of a business productivity tool. If you really have to use the same space and the same devices, another thing I try to do is actually reset from that environment. So at the end of the workday, I might go change into gym clothes or change my outfit somehow. And ideally, I'm leaving the apartment for at least 20-30 minutes so that when I come back, I feel like I've had enough time to decompress and transition out. I'm going to be making a video on the 9 to 5 reset for work from home. So if you're interested, be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out. At the end of the day, no system, no person is perfect. Life will get in the way and you're going to make mistakes. You're going to miss specific days or habits. The most important thing is probably that you're kind to yourself and you're not beating yourself up and adding artificial pressure, because then you'll also start to associate all of these bad emotions whenever you're trying to build something for yourself. So if you miss a day at the gym, then you try to employ the never skip twice rule. You might miss on Wednesday, but then that means on Thursday, you're back in the gym. If you start to skip twice, it becomes 3 times and the habit starts to lose momentum. There's a lot of practical tips he has in the book around how you build momentum, things like habit stacking, which basically is the idea where you take a new habit you're trying to build and you add it on top of a habit you already have. For me, I make coffee every morning. It takes a couple minutes. That's usually when I try to journal. So I start to have this cue that whenever I'm making coffee, I'm pulling out my phone and I'm starting to dictate and brain dump in my journal app. This also goes hand in hand with creating a dedicated space where I always try and journal in the same place, roughly at the same time every morning. And slowly but surely, you've built a routine where you get up, you make coffee, you sit on the couch, and you journal, and it starts to become the second nature for you. The important part about building a system is that you don't try and do too much all at once. So there's this concept of standardizing before you optimize, where it's more important that you're actually just showing up and checking it off in the early days, because that's actually when it's hardest. Yes, you have a lot of motivation. It might be the start of a new year and you're kind of riding that high, but surely enough, at the end of a couple weeks, you're going to start to find reasons to not show up. So at first, it's all about just getting that habit and building that routine before you start making it too complex. This year, I really wanted to get back into journaling, but rather than saying I wanted to write 30 minutes every single day, I actually just said I wanted to journal at the morning of every weekday. So I didn't really worry too much about weekends at first. I didn't also put any limits or goals on how long and how wordy the journal entries needed to be. It was more important that I woke up, I journaled before I started work. Down the road, I might start to add specific questions to kind of get a little bit deeper into my journal entries. Maybe I want to start hitting 5 or 10 minutes, so I'm getting more substantive thoughts and results out of my journal. But again, the idea is that you're moving slowly here because you don't want to do too much at once. Systems can absolutely be changed, but at the end of the day, if you're spending more time editing the system than you are operating inside of it, then it could end up being more glorified procrastination and actually be hurting more than it's helping. I used to struggle with this quite a bit when it came to note-taking, especially digital note-taking. In the world of Notion, which is kind of this whole concept that you can build whatever you want in this tool, build a second brain, build the perfect note-taking system, I got so sucked into building templates and automations and making my dashboard and notes look pretty, but I actually wasn't taking notes and getting anything done. That being said, there is absolutely a time and place to review a system if it's just not working for you. You might be trying to build too many habits at once. Maybe you just need to pick the top 3 focuses for the next 90 days and just focus on building those. No system's going to be perfect because our goals are constantly evolving. And that's why it's really great to give yourself the freedom of tracking your inputs because, for example, you might say that you want to read 50 books in a year, but get halfway through and you've read 20, 30 books and you don't remember anything. That might be a point to reflect and say, I think I'd rather read 1 book a month, but actually retain what I'm reading and what I've learned. So at that point, you've tracked how many books you've read. So you can have full freedom to change the inputs to one book a month and not feel like you're falling short anymore of hitting 50 books for the entire year. When it comes to refining and auditing your habits, the book talks about how blind repetition can just end up being a trap. If all you're ever doing is just showing up and it's no longer providing value, then it might just not be working anymore and you can then decide to change it. The key here is that you would have already had a pretty consistent run of trying it out. You didn't just try it a couple times and then give up. You would obviously try to use your best judgment and say, I've done this for 90 days, I don't think it works for me anymore, and I'm going to try a different habit. So you do want to build that grace for yourself at the end of the day to tweak the systems if it's just not working. Like I said, there's a lot of practical advice, and it's a really easy read in my opinion. I got the audiobook version. I think I binged it in 2 weeks, which is pretty fast for me. I listened to like one chapter every time I was at the gym. And he also makes it really easy to follow along because he always does chapter summaries and even does section summaries. So I'd highly recommend checking it out if you're someone who struggles to build habits, and especially if you've had a bit of a negative relationship with yourself around discipline and how you go about improving your lifestyle. If you want a simple way to try this out, I'd recommend looking at some of your habits and asking which one of those is no longer providing value for you. If you're working on a new habit, then try to identify what that gateway habit is. If your end goal is to document your day, open up the Notes app and just write one sentence. Try to find that entry point that takes less than 2 minutes and can help you start to build momentum. Hopefully you got some value out of this video. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one.